Throughout history, freethinkers have outraged the religious with their wacky ideas about the virtues of free speech, reason, and of course, eating babies. Now, God is dying, and it's time to dispose of his remains. From the pits of hell, Satan sends two puppets of the imperialist West and the Zionist Jews against God, Islam, and tiny kittens to bring you their propaganda and conspire for a new world order. This is Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment with Ali Rizvi and Armin Navabi.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment. My name is Ali Rizvi, and usually with me is Armin Navabi, but Armin Navabi is not here for this episode. He is actually off in the Far East somewhere eating scorpions, which is true. I don't know. Did you see that video? You haven't seen it?
No.
He's okay. So he's in. I think he's in Thailand, and he made a whole video, a very nice quality, well-produced video of him getting a scorpion, roasted scorpion or something off the streets and just eating the whole thing. He ate the entire thing. So he's eating scorpions. It doesn't do much. Doesn't do very well for the atheist stereotype, but at least he's not eating babies. Yeah. So, and speaking of babies, all right. So here we go. That's a segue. So we have a guest on today that I've wanted to talk to for a long time, and in a way, I don't want to say it's good Armin's not here. It's always good when he's here, but Armin doesn't have any children. I do, right? And the topic today that we're talking about is we're going to be talking about secular parenting, and our guest today is Courtney Hurd. Also known as Godless Mom. Many of you follow her on Instagram and on Twitter and everywhere you are. I mean, you're all over the place. It's sort of a very unique niche that you have, and I think it's great. Like, you're the first person I thought of when we thought about doing this topic about parenting kids without God, raising children without God and without religion, and all of the benefits to that and the challenges and everything that we're faced with. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
And so first, before we start on that, I wanted to talk about how there's been some news with you, especially.
Yes.
You are now co-executive director of Atheist Alliance International, which we've talked about on this podcast before. It's a great group. It's Atheist Alliance International, so they do a lot of work outside North America as well. And you recently, and I guess this goes with the whole theme of children being raised with humanist values, but you recently wrote a fantastic article on Atheist, just I think early January, about a school in Uganda that was started by humanists, and Uganda is obviously like a very sort of Christian fundamentalist society where they punish homosexuality with death and all of these things. So let's start by, first of all, just talking about Atheist Alliance International, what your role is there, and maybe on the school as well.
Okay, well, at Atheist Alliance International, basically me and Bridget, who is my co-executive director, we are trying to just build up more of the programs that they already have in place, which is so many. Like when I started at Atheist Alliance International as their webmaster. And,
wow.
But they soon realized that I have like a marketing background that I had a lot more skills to offer than just web design and stuff like that. So but in doing that, like I got to scour through their website and everything like that, and I realized how much they're actually doing. And I mean, I've been in this community for like so long now. I think it's close to 6 years, and I didn't know half of this stuff. And I'm like, we have to get this out there, right? Like, because these are huge initiatives that you're taking on, and these are things that are going to have a real positive impact on people's lives. And one of those things is this school in Uganda, which is the Kasisi Humanist School. And it was started in 2011 with funding and volunteers from Atheist Alliance International. Like, they facilitated the starting of this school. It was started by a man named Robert, and I cannot pronounce his last name.
I think it's Mwambale or something like that.
Yeah, and he is dedicated to these kids, and since 2011, he's expanded into 3 different campuses. He boards a lot of the students because they are orphaned by HIV as a result of very backwards religious thinking, right? Because in Uganda, HIV medication is considered contraband, and people get arrested with possession of HIV medication.
Yeah.
And
wow.
And they get arrested for being in possession of condoms, and so it's huge. It's huge.
Wait,
what this guy is doing.
Condoms are not allowed there, as in there's a restriction on condoms in the
Yes.
country?
Yes. 16 people last year were arrested for being in possession of either birth control products or HIV medications.
Yeah.
So
Sorry,
go ahead. Not only are they not allowed to prevent contracting the disease, but they can't even treat themselves once they do contract it. And so a lot of these kids are orphaned because their parents just die, and it's really sad. And this guy Robert is just housing them, and he's so dedicated. If you look at his Facebook feed, it's amazing. They're building a brand new classroom right now called the Nelson Mandela Classroom, and it's just an amazing school, and they teach humanist values, which is really important.
Yeah, we're going to put a link to the article that you wrote in the description of this. But what's really insane to me about this is I remember when I think it was Pope John Paul II or Benedict or maybe both of them that would go to Africa, and they would do these tours in a place where the prevalence of HIV is sometimes up to 1 in 4 people are infected with HIV, and they would talk about how you shouldn't use condoms. And to me, when people talk about how, Catholicism cannot be as harmful as, just when we see overt jihadism, we see the dead bodies and everything. It's very overt to us. But when these guys, when they go and they do this, you don't see it as obviously, but it's criminal. It's actually murderous to go there and in places and societies where the rates of HIV are so high to preach against condoms. Right, especially from an authority like the Pope. So I actually didn't know. I knew that Uganda was crazy, like in terms of just very religious fundamentalist, right up to the government level. But I didn't know they actually had a restriction on condoms.
Yeah,
I've never even heard of that. So
they have. Have you seen that documentary "God Loves Uganda"?
No, I haven't. No,
it's totally worth checking out. It's actually like a lot of these ideas and stuff are coming from like you said, like people like the Pope, but it's like preachers and pastors that are on mission trips from Canada, from the US, and from the UK who are coming over and pushing the ideas that don't fly here anymore on these people, because they live under the poverty line and they don't have the education accessible to them. So they believe these things, and they think that these preachers are going to be the solution to their problems. And it's just really sad. But you know what? It's reading about all of this said that it's 99% religious in Uganda, but a lot of the projects that we've been considering working on are in Uganda by different humanist and atheist groups. And I think there's a lot more non-religious people in there than maybe are reporting to census.
Well, it's like that. We see that all the time. And Armin and I, and we've talked about it a lot of times. In Saudi Arabia, people think that it's a super, super religious conservative society, which it is. But I mean, polls from actually several years ago, so there's every reason to believe it's increased now, have shown that up to over 1 million atheists in Saudi Arabia right now, and we've had several of them on the show. They've come here, they've run out of there, they've gotten out of there, and they've we've interviewed them. So this is the thing when you have just this overt sort of religious oppression in these societies. It's also interesting to me that, because, we talk a lot about this. We talk about whether, this Christianity, whether the secular society in the West is somehow, whether it was Christianity that facilitated it. A lot of people like to give credit to Christianity for the secularism and the Enlightenment values. But I think that what secularism is a completely separate thing that kept Christianity in check, as when it's not in check, you see what you're talking about in Uganda, right?
Yeah. I totally agree.
Yeah. So congratulations on the appointment. Congratulations on the great work. I think that it's a fantastic organization. So
I'm really excited.
Yeah, and even though the topic right now is going to be different, we'd love to have you back on when Armin's here. I know he's going to be interested in this to talk about the work that you guys are doing with AAI as well. So anyway, sure. Moving on to the topic of this podcast, which is raising children without God, raising children without religion. So how did you get into this? Can you just give a little bit of your background? Did you grow up religious, or how did you get into the secular parenting topic and start writing about it and so on?
Well, no, I didn't grow up religious. I am possibly fourth generation atheist. I'm definitely third generation, but I'm not quite sure about my great grandfather. But no, I come from just a group of heathens, and growing up, I had really no understanding of the larger cultural context of the world, like where other people were growing up super religious. I knew religious people, but not very religious. Like here, I'm sure it's the same in Toronto, but growing up in Vancouver, nobody talked about it. It just was a non-thing, right? And it just never came up. And I didn't even really understand some of these concepts until I was like a teenager. I didn't really understand what church was. I remember getting in trouble at Brownies for asking who God was. I didn't understand these things. My parents at home, the only time they ever really talked about this stuff was when they were cracking jokes about it. So
oh my God, that's a world I want to see.
So I just didn't really get it. And then growing up, I started to understand. And my parents took us traveling, me and my brother traveling around the world a few times. And I've been to Thailand a few times. I did not eat a scorpion though.
Most people don't. Just want to say that. I mean, Armin, I'm sorry, but most people don't do this.
Yeah.
But kudos to you. Go ahead.
That's when I started to realize that, religion was a very serious thing to a lot of people. And so I started to develop strong opinions about it. And the internet came along and I started going on Reddit a lot. And that was back when the atheism subreddit was one of the default ones that you would be subscribed to automatically, which was awesome. And I just remember seeing all the posts come through my feed on Reddit, and I would be like, I totally agree with that. And it would just get my mind going. And I was like, oh, I have so much to say about that. And so I started my blog, and I just called it Godless Mom because I was a mom and godless. So it wasn't really focused on secular parenting when I first started it. When I first started it, I just wanted to have fun. And if you read some of my early posts, I would probably get canceled for them now. But
we'd all be canceled for everything pretty much now. Yeah.
But yeah, so it was just about being funny and having a laugh. But in that time, one of the first things that happened was Mubarak Paulo contacted me when he was in the hospital in Nigeria. And we launched that campaign to get him out of the hospital. And
and for those who aren't familiar with it, can you explain who Mubarak Paulo is?
Yeah, he's a Nigerian. He was in the north of Nigeria, Boko Haram territory. And his dad he had connections to Boko Haram. And when he came out as an atheist against everybody's advice, because he talked to us about it a lot. We're like, don't do it, dude. But he did, and his dad reacted poorly, and he was beaten and drugged and then committed to a psychiatric hospital, where his mother slipped him a cell phone, and that's how he got in touch with us. And this was my first time anybody reached out to me for this sort of a issue, you know, where they needed help because they're an atheist. And so I just jumped on it, and we put together a team, and we launched the campaign, and we got him on like the BBC and all the big names and news and stuff like that. And eventually he got out of the hospital, and now he is a very active humanist activist in the south of Nigeria, which is more Christian than Muslim. So yeah, that's what happened with him. But since that happened with Mubarak, it's weekly that I get emails from people saying help, you know, like, and they're from like anonymous email addresses, so you can't even like try to track them down or anything like that. And I've had so many of them disappear on me. And so realizing that, I started to take the blogging more seriously, and that's when it turned into activism. And I started to write about secular parenting because I believe that you know, it starts with kids.
Yeah. So so that's interesting. So what was it like? You know, you're being raised in a very, very atheist family as it is, and you're not exposed to these things, and then you get older, and then you see that because of these, you know, because of religion and religious belief, you know, you have this guy in Nigeria who's being beaten. You know, there are people under threat for their lives. So because I think that, you know, a lot of people who've been raised like this often take it for granted. They're like, well, you know, it's not such a big deal. And people religious, okay, you know, I was raised without it, everything's fine. Is that what made you take it seriously when you saw situations like Mubarak? Or
yeah, definitely, because I literally had no idea. And I would say I'm about 95% done writing my book, which talks about that in the beginning, about how I had no idea that people suffered like this. I thought it was a thing of the past. Like, I thought the last time that people suffered because of religion was the Salem witch trials, right? Like I was dumb. I was very ignorant to all of this stuff, and it was so new to me, and it's still shocking. Like, so many of the people that I work with now at Atheist Alliance International are hardcore activists because of what has happened to them in their lives, and I've started to get to know like their stories, and like so many of them have just been like disowned by their families and stuff like that. And it's just, I did not know. I honestly did not know that happened, and that's why that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited that I get to work with AAI now, is because I've been writing for a long time about how I wish that there was some way that I could do something about this, like beyond blogging on Papios, you know?
Yeah. So bring up, so how many kids do you have?
2.
You have 2, right? And their ages are like probably
11.
A little older now.
11, and my daughter is 17, and she's my stepdaughter, so I kind of got grandfathered into that, and I love her. She's awesome.
So let's start with, so here's the thing, you know, one of the reasons that I think your insights would be so useful on this show is that I now hear from, you know, a lot of ex-Muslims, people, you know, left Islam, and they're raising their kids, and they want to raise their kids without religion, but they don't really have a reference point, in the sense that their parents raised them with religion. I've actually met people who are secular, they're ex-Muslim, but they wonder if their kids might turn out differently or something will go wrong because they just don't have a frame of reference for how to do that. Raise that. And the biggest problem is that, you know, people say if you don't raise your kids without God, then they won't be moral. They're never going to learn. Like, what incentive will they have to do the good thing? Again, this is not my view. I'm just telling you about a common a question that you hear from people. That are they? How are we going to make them good? What incentive are they going to have to do good things and not do bad things if they don't have this sort of the God police above them? And so you have the advantage of being raised godless, and also you're parenting your children the same way. So why aren't you a criminal who's going around and murdering and raping people?
I had great role models. My dad, I'm very, like, I followed my dad's footsteps in that he worked for a lot of nonprofits, and I worked for nonprofits even before I started blogging. As Godless Mom, I worked for addiction recovery stuff and stuff like that. But he started a lot of nonprofits he started the Crisis Center in Richmond, BC, which is where the airport for Vancouver is. And it's still around today, which has saved thousands of lives. He worked with sex workers. I remember being a kid and my dad would be like paged and he'd have to go out to the Vancouver East Side to help somebody on the street, like 3:00 in the morning. And this is the example that he set for me. And my mom was similar. She was a teacher and she taught in a very different way than most teachers do. And she had like a couple of write-ups written about her in the local, well, not in local, the Vancouver Sun.
Yeah.
Is the Sun of the province. And then of course it was also the traveling as well. And just seeing how my parents just connected with other parts of the world and seeing, I remember one of the things that really, like, it was a turning point in my life was when I was in Bangkok. I was 15 years old and my parents took me to Patpong, which is the red light district.
Yeah.
Because there was a night market there, right? Like they're just interested in the night market. But, I saw girls who were younger than me working the streets there, and I just, like, it's just so vivid in my mind. It changed everything. So I am not a criminal, because my parents set a really, really great example, but also because they just knew how to instill values. Like, you don't need to refer to God to say, this is good or that's bad. You just have to be able to look at another person and see how they're feeling and judge how they're feeling. And that's what my parents taught me, was empathy and considering how other people are affected by your actions.
Yeah, I first started thinking about this, I think, when I was in 8th grade. I was in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. I went to an American school there, and there were people from all kinds of different countries. And I remember there was a Swedish kid who used to sit in front of me in our history class. And I was talking to him, and then I just started talking about praying or something. And he's like, "Oh, I don't pray." I'm like, "Why? You don't pray to God?" He's like, "No, I don't believe in God." And that's the first time I'd heard anybody say they don't believe in God. And and especially growing up in Saudi Arabia, I'm sure there were other people who didn't, but I had never actually heard somebody say that to me. And I wrote about this in my book. It was the first atheist I met. I think we were both like 11 or something, or 12. And he goes, I said, "Well, if you don't believe in God, you don't pray, you don't do anything." He's like, "No." And like, then the first thing I asked him was like, "Why do you do good things then? And why don't you do?" And he just looked at me like I was crazy. He's like, "Because it's the right thing to do."
Yeah.
I was like, "Why can't you just go and steal stuff?" I was like, "Because that's wrong. You shouldn't do that." And I was completely flabbergasted. I didn't understand, why that was the case. Because the thing is, the reason that I didn't steal and I didn't do those things was also because it was inherent in me. But I had thought it was because of religion. And then I started thinking about it. I would think about it often later on. We would I'd have some. I'd order too much at a restaurant. Take some leftover food home. On the way, see a homeless guy. This is not in Saudi Arabia. There's not really a lot of homeless people in Saudi Arabia, but then and I'd see that they're hungry. I could see that they're very skinny. I could see their ribs sticking out, and I could hear their stomach growling. And they'd look at me, and I'd just give them leftover food. Mm-hmm. And then I would think, I'm like, am I doing that? Why did I do that? Did I do it because I wanted to go to heaven? Like, wasn't even on my mind. Did I do it because I didn't want to go to hell? Wasn't even on my mind. I didn't do it out of fear. I did it because I know what I feel like when my stomach's growling, right? I know what it would feel like if I was skinny and I didn't have anything, if I was living on the street. And I was putting myself in his shoes. And it was because of empathy. And that's where the morality comes. So I think that those experiences are accessible to most people if you point it out to them. So
well, that's what I do with my son is like if let's say he's not sharing something with a friend or something like that, I always ask him, how do you think that makes your friend feel? Like I get him thinking about that, even though I know that in there already he is. It's just getting those words out and having his understanding of those feelings that he has inside, having him understand them like outwardly verbally, it helps it sink in. Like, I'm not going to do that next time. And both my kids are amazing. They're just incredibly compassionate people, and I'm not really worried about their morality growing up. Maybe a little bit of laziness, but
like my daughter, who's 3, she has absolutely no idea. But I mean, she's 3 years old. But by the time I was 3, I already knew. We had been taught that there's one Allah, and we used to learn it on our fingers. There's one Allah, and then there's all of them. So the messenger, and so we kind of learned these things that God wants you to do good, and don't do this, otherwise God will punish you. And so, but with her, I've noticed she has a lot of compassion. Like she sees somebody else who's in trouble, she goes and she helps them. Her idea of sharing isn't very developed yet because she'll say, "Oh, my cousin isn't sharing with me," which essentially means she's not giving me the thing that I want to play with. So a little bit of a warped sense of sharing, but but overall, I can see it already. I mean, it's just inherent. There's this idea that she doesn't want to, if she sees that I'm stressed out about something, she'll come and give me a hug. I mean, there's a kind of, it's already there. And it's interesting because we haven't even mentioned anything to her. We don't plan to. But what do you think about actually making children aware of, like, how you said that you were ignorant about a lot of things when you're growing up? So maybe, I mean, as in not telling them that this is truth, but telling them that there are people who believe these things and exposing them to the idea of there's some people who believe in God and some people who believe in certain religions. Have you done anything like that with your children? And if so, how?
Yep. Because of my blog, it comes up quite often. I like right now, they know why I'm up here doing this. Right. And so, we talk about it a lot. And I think personally that explaining religion to kids is important because it's so impactful in the world today. It's relevant. It may not be relevant in our town and in their lives right now, but in the greater global community, it is totally relevant right now. And so I think definitely they gain from learning about it. My parents did tell me that stuff when I was younger. They would say, because I remember like going to my cousin's baptism and stuff like that. And my parents would say, people believe in a God, but I still didn't understand, right? Like I didn't.
Right. Yeah.
It's so, when you're not raised with it, it is so weird. Like it's like coming up and telling you that you need to talk to your pants every day. Like it's just insane. to you when people are explaining this stuff. It's so weird if you're not raised with it and or surrounded by it, you know. It's so weird. And I just didn't understand. My parents, they didn't talk about it a lot, but they, you know, when this came up, they would explain, you know, people go to church and they talk to God, but once you understand what church and God means, and how do you explain God to somebody who doesn't get it? It's just, I didn't understand. And I think that my son is similar. Like I have conversations with him on a regular basis, because I will talk to him about some of the issues that we work on at Atheist Alliance International. I'll talk to him about all kinds of stuff, and it often comes up that religion has something to do with it, and I can see in his face that he just, like, it's not registering what this actually is. And I don't know how to explain it to him outside of taking him to church, which I'm not going to do. But it's just, I think it's important to teach kids, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, because there's so much art related to it. There's so much. I mean, we're surrounded by it, right? If they read any kind of history book, if they go into an art museum, it's all there. But there's also another question. I mean, aside from all of that, you know, we talked about the instilling of morality, where morality comes from. But what about just the idea of where did we come from? Why are we here? What is the purpose of life? Now, have you had those discussions with your children? And when they talk to you about it, have you ever noticed that they feel, because, you know, it is a very tempting thing to have a nice prepackaged answer for it that can seem like it's a wisdom of the ages and everybody's believed this, and so it can be compelling, and the religious community for sure puts a lot of effort in getting that point out there. So I guess as they get older, do they ask you these questions, and how do you handle that?
Well, we've talked about this a lot with my son. My stepdaughter didn't always live with us, so we've only had her the last 4 years, but she's just smart on her own, without our influence. She's amazingly intelligent. But my son, we used to watch Cosmos with him on Netflix. It was
there you go.
We'd come downstairs and he'd be watching it on his own, and he's very into just learning and exploring things to know about. And we'll catch him on YouTube. We'll walk by the computer and he's watching this channel called Oversimplified, which I guess they explain stories from history and stuff like that. He's just a nerd. He's like his mom.
Yeah.
But these conversations come up a lot, and he'll ask the strangest questions. He asked one last night. I can't remember what it is, but it gets us into these conversations. And he basically asked, what do you think that it's possible that we're in a game? He basically was asking about the simulation theory.
Yeah.
And we have these conversations all the time, and I tell him, you know what, you believe what you want to believe, and as long as I teach him how to question everything, and he's very good at it. He doesn't believe in it, in the ghost stories that his friends tell him and stuff like that. He doesn't buy it for a second. He's very funny about it too. He'll be he'll crack jokes about it, and he's been like that since he was 5 or 6. He doesn't believe in any of that stuff. I remember when I was a kid, I used to be afraid of witches, and because I guess the Wizard of Oz really scared me. And I was afraid of ghosts and all of these things, and he just is not at all, because he doesn't believe that they're real. Not 1%, nothing. And so we have these conversations with him a lot, and we get pretty philosophical, and it's fun. It's really cool watching the brain develop and grow and seeing what he's thinking about.
No, I mean, a lot of that, yeah, I mean this sincerely. I think a lot of that credit goes to you because there are many, there are many things out there that are difficult to resist, right? I mean, there's a few things that I can mention. Think of it is sometimes there are kids, even this includes kids who are raised in a secular way. If they feel alienated, if they don't feel connected to their peers, or they don't feel like they belong in any group, then they can be susceptible to, radicalization. They can, and by radicalization, I mean, if there's anybody who comes in and offers them a sense of meaning in life. I mean, this is how missionaries work as well, right? And
Yeah.
in the Muslim community, the Dawa people, they come out and they invite you to the faith. And there are a lot of people raised secular who become susceptible to these things because they have other problems going on in their lives. And we've had guests on this podcast as well who've talked about that experience, raised by relatively moderate to liberal, even secular parents, but they kind of went in this direction because they were looking for a sense of belonging, a sense of identity, whatever the void was. So, and those things are all around. And most recently, I actually saw it with Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson is, he's really more like feels more like the guy's running a church in a sense,
Yeah.
And a lot of I would come across his fans, a lot of his followers would, whenever I've done talks, there's always one or two with their questions,
Yeah.
and they would ask about these things. They'd ask about, what about meaning? What does your life mean? And many of these people were, they were into the whole atheist movement, and then they saw Jordan Peterson. They kind of went there and they started looking for that. So have you ever experienced anything like that, or if something? When I say the credit goes to you, what I mean is that I think that you're kind of keeping your kids grounded. That they know they have a mom they can come speak to. Not a lot of kids have that. So I guess, yeah, I don't have a totally clear question, but in case something like that happened, and your son was asking you questions about, there's this church, there's someone talk to me, and I'm beginning to think that there's a sense of meaning or purpose here in this community or that community. And then how would you, have you ever thought about how you'd handle something like that?
Yeah, I get asked that all the time by religious people online. What would you do if your kid went to church or something like that? And I mean, I have zero problem with them doing that. I don't have a problem with religious people. I don't have a problem with them as long as it's personal to them and they're not trying to affect other people's lives with their beliefs. You believe what you want. I don't care. And it's the same with my kids. I've told them that a million times. I said, if you want to believe this stuff, you can believe this stuff. And I every single time I talk about my work and what I do with Godless Mom and everything like that, I tell them, this is what mommy believes. You can believe whatever you want. But the thing is that I also know that the way that I've raised them is kind of like a vaccine against dogmatic thinking, because I've taught, at least my son, and my stepdaughter has a mother who also values critical thought as well. So she's been raised with that as well. So, but I've taught my son, to value critical thought and to not just believe what people say. And so I don't think he'll ever fall for anything like that. Like, he sees through stuff like that even I don't.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I'm not super worried about that, but go ahead.
No, finish what you're saying.
If he did decide that he wanted to go to church and check it out or whatever, I would tell him, go. And maybe I'd even go with him just to know what's being said and what he's being taught, so that I can counter it, or maybe just ask questions like the Socratic method,
Right.
But I'm not super worried about that, especially where we live, just not a whole lot of religious people.
Yeah, I think that, when you talked about critical thinking, I think that is the inoculation. Because, I mean, you can, if you use the whole charity example, Yes, there's a lot of religious people. They always talk about charity all the time. If you're talking about, morality and doing the good thing, bad thing, I mean, there's, they can claim that as well. But when it comes to critical thinking and just really questioning everything and skepticism, I think that skill, if they have that early on, that is, I think, the one thing that would really inoculate them. Because, and I actually, because right now there's a lot of questions about identity, belonging. Where do I belong? Where do I do? What is my community? Um, people are exploring that a lot more now in ways that they couldn't before, because a lot of these different identities were, they were taboo.
Yeah.
It was very restricted how you could define yourself. If you're born male, or if you're born like a certain skin color, if you're born whatever it was, that sort of predefined you, and there wasn't a lot of latitude in terms of how far you could try and reach beyond it. But now it's actually fairly accepted and encouraged. So there's a lot of exploration of that going on. But I think that if there is critical thinking, as you're saying, if you teach your kids critical thought and how to question things right from the beginning, I think that makes a massive difference. And I get asked the same thing. My own sort of extended family members and friends, they say, well, what would you do if your daughter grew up and she wanted to wear the hijab or the burqa? And my answer to that is just saying, okay, go for it. Like I'm not going to lie to her, and I'm not going to say that I think that this is right. If she asks me what I think about it, I'll tell her what I think about it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I went through phases. The reason I am the way that I am now, the reason I think the way I do right now, is because when my parents are both they were liberally religious Muslims, but they always, whatever kind of experimentation I was doing and trying to explore and try out different things. I remember I wanted to be Buddhist for a little while, and then I became super religious, like Muslim, Islamic religious, and they just kind of rolled their eyes like, okay, let's see how this goes.
Yeah.
And I feel like you have to let them do that to find their own way.
Yeah, it's the same with anything with kids. Like, there's a lot of things that we've struggled with our kids with, my son in vegetables, for instance, and you just sometimes have to let them fall or go in a wrong direction in order to learn the right direction. I think that parents who try to direct everything that their kids are doing and try to keep them on the path of vision for them, you end up with kids who don't have a grasp of reality. Basically, they don't have a grasp of the real world and the fact that they are not the center of it, and that they need to adapt to the world as much as people should be respecting you. You should be respecting the world too, and stuff like that. And that's, I think that critical thought is extremely important, but just as important is building up their own personal self-worth, because I think sometimes the thing that draws people into these groups, these cult-like groups or these religions, is just not feeling whole and not feeling like they're fulfilled, right? And like I've raised my son to, I honestly didn't know it would work, but it did. By just telling him that no matter what, I love him. No matter what, I'm on his side. I've told him that, if he ends up in prison at some point, I will go visit him. It doesn't matter what it's for. Like, it's just, I am there for you. Same thing for my stepdaughter too. And I've told him that it's because he's valued and he's worth it and all of this stuff. And so he feels that. And now, like, he's short like his mom, and he gets made fun of for it. And he comes home and he tells me, he's like, the kids are making fun of me, because I'm short. And I'm like, oh, is that bothering you? How do you feel about that? And he's like, I love it. he loves being short, apparently. And then I found out one day that his friends were calling him Jojo Siwa because his name is Joey. And they were calling him Jojo Siwa, the little child singer with the pigtails and the bows in her hair.
I don't even know, but I'm sure I'm going to get my share of this stuff, and I'll learn all about this. Yeah, in the years to
they
come.
were calling him that, and he ran with it, and he turned it into a screen name on Minecraft. So it's just
Really?
he's unshakable. He's completely unshakable. And it's actually pretty scary because he's literally not afraid of anything. And I think that he's going to be like one of those adrenaline junkies or something. But I think that self-worth is just as important as critical thought, because when you know who you are and you're okay with who you are, and you know that you have a support system, you're less likely to fall for those ideas that offer you those things, right? Because you already have it.
Right. And so the thing with self-worth, this is one thing that we hear a lot about, they first it was millennials, now it's Generation Z. It's pretty much what every older generation said about the younger generation, is that they're entitled, they have too much self-esteem, it's undeserved. And do you see any of that? I mean, not with your own kids necessarily, but do you see that as an issue? So I mean, I understand he's unshakable and everything, but what happens at some point if so then I wish this never does, but this is just as a question. If something happens and he is shaken because of something, how would you prepare him for that? And I'm asking this as a parent because I feel scared of that sometimes. I wonder, because when you think about it with your own kid, it's so heartbreaking. But at the same time, you're like, well, if I shelter them, then I'm not empowering them. And if I empower them, then it's scary too. Like, you're sending them out, and you want to protect them, but you don't want to protect them to the extent that they never they're never in sort of any kind of vulnerable situation. I guess. Did you know what I mean?
Yeah, I fully agree with free range parenting, and that's how we parent our kids. Like the whole summer, I didn't see my stepdaughter because she was out the whole time. We just trust her. We just trust that she's going to make the right decisions for her. And until she starts making weird decisions, we will just trust her. And so far it's worked. And it's the same with Joey. He's allowed to ride around town anytime he wants. He saved up $700 over the summer to buy himself a Kona mountain bike. And
nice.
So he rides around by himself when a lot of his friends, even though they're 11, they're still not allowed to, which is really weird to me. And he's watched Walking Dead with us and documentaries that are jarring and stuff like that. So we don't shelter him in any way, and we let him see reality and understand reality, and we talk to him about the difficult stuff, and we don't avoid it. And I think that helps him, because that's what helped me growing up. Before I went traveling, I was a ditzy Canadian teenager, and all I cared about was who I had a crush on. And then I went to Bangkok, and my whole world changed. Right?
Oh my God, I'm still like that, I think. But
yeah.
Another question is that, and then this is also something a lot of people think about. I have so much stuff to ask you. I'm going to be mindful of your time, but you said that when you're raised in my household, it's going to be the same thing. My daughter's going to be exposed to a lot of us, joking about religion. The way that your parents talked about religion, you said that your father, every time they brought it up, it was usually, mocking or making fun of some aspect of it. And really just the best humor is in religion. I mean, there's nothing funnier than
Pope jokes. That was my dad. Pope jokes all the time.
Pope jokes. Yeah, a whole bunch of adults who believe that, a man flew up on a flying horse and met Moses and above the clouds. I mean, it's just, it's completely crazy. So, and it's funny, and it's even funnier that people believe it. So these kids, I'd say, my kids growing up in this environment, we obviously have a lot of extended family that's religious. I'm sure that, your kids in school, they're probably exposed to other kids. They may have friends who are also religious or come from religious families. How do you separate the the lightness or the joking and everything that we do about religion at home that they're exposed to, with maybe a friend at school who they really like and have a good relationship with, but he's from a family where they take this stuff very seriously. So is the line always clear that, okay, yeah, we joke about this stuff at home, but this person who seriously believes in it, we shouldn't treat him badly necessarily?
Yeah, that's
how do you do that?
Well, it's a discussion we've had a lot with my son. We joke about religion a lot at home, and we actually swear a lot at home as well in front of him, because I'm a believer. It's just words, and they affect you how you let them. And I've raised Joey to understand that some people, and I think the language, specifically with swearing, the language that I've used is, I have no idea why, but some people get really uptight about these specific words. And I'm like, if you want to avoid like trouble in your life, just don't say them around other people. Just say them around us. And so far he's done really, really well. He's gotten in trouble twice for saying bad words at school, and in my opinion they weren't bad words. One of them was testicles and the other one was cocaine. I don't know why he was talking about cocaine. He said something.
I know a lot of people who think both of those are great words.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I should probably anyway. But
I don't see anything wrong with testicles in particular. That's the real word for actual genitals. But anyways.
Well, go ahead.
But we've always just explained to him that some people get upset about things that we don't get upset about, and he's a very empathetic to begin with. So he doesn't want to, and he's also quite shy. Like, I was a really shy kid, and I'm still pretty quiet, even though on the internet I don't seem like I am. But he takes after me, and he doesn't say a whole lot around people that he's not super comfortable with. But he doesn't, he understands when I say, if you say something about this, people are going to be hurt. And I explain it to them, I explain it to Joey, they see this God or Jesus as like you might feel about your sister, Right. And if somebody said something really bad about your sister, your feelings are going to be hurt. You're going to be upset about that. And I said, so just, be careful of the things that you say around people who might believe these things. The thing is, though, is that he doesn't encounter religious people
a whole lot. But does he ask you ever that, okay, well, Mom, you're telling me this, but then, I go and I see your blog and I see some of the stuff that you post, and aren't you hurting people when you say those things? Has he ever have you ever had that discussion?
He's never asked that before, but I have explained to him before that when I'm when I post the stuff like that to my Facebook page, these are jokes about the idea, and that I separate the idea from the person, and I would never ever one of my biggest pet peeves on atheist Twitter is when people call religious people idiots or imply that they're stupid because they're religious. It just drives me crazy. I hate that. And I tell Joey all the time, just because somebody's religious, it doesn't mean that they're stupid or bad. It doesn't mean that we need to make fun of them. All it means is that they do different things about the world than we do. But that's it. And that's all it is. And I've been saying this to him since he was really little, so I know it's really in there. Yeah. And it's never been a problem. He's always been very accepting of everybody.
Mm-hmm. And so what is the biggest... it seems like all of this seems great, and I think it's very encouraging to a lot of people who are hearing it. But what are some of the biggest challenges you faced where... you mentioned he got in trouble for saying bad, quote unquote, bad words like testicles and cocaine. That well, the thing is, like my daughter, if I like when she was even younger, and I used to try to get her to say things. I'm like, "Can you say this?" She wouldn't say a thing. And then when I'm driving one day, and I'm like, "Oh, motherfucker," and she'll immediately, I hear this voice in the back, like, "Oh, motherfucker!" Like, and then I'm like, "There you go." Now she's gonna go and she's gonna say this in school, and something's gonna happen. So they always pick up the stuff you don't want them to say. They'll say that, I think, is inevitable.
Yeah.
But have there been any challenges? Not necessarily. I think just in general, where where you struggled with something, or you didn't see eye to eye on something with your son, and how do you go about doing that? This is like a very general parenting question. It's a little weird asking it, but still.
Well, it's with my stepdaughter, we've had some differences in opinions.
Yeah. And by the way, I just want to say, any of this, I know that this is some of these questions, because we're talking about parenting, can get personal. So please feel free to, if there's something you don't want to say, just don't say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, my stepdaughter is an open book. She doesn't mind me talking about. I've written about her before on the blog too. We actually raised money for a youth group that she belonged to, but yeah, we've had differences of opinions with her because she's convinced that some of her lack of desire to get things done is genetic and unchangeable. And so I know that that's not true, because I used to be lazy too, and I mean I still can be a lot. So
I have a friend who's my age. I'm 44, and he's pretty much my age, and he's convinced that his entire lack of desire, even today, to do anything, he thinks that it's genetic as well.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. She's convinced that it's like, she does have some mental health struggles, and I know from my own experiences and the experiences of people that I've been close with, and also like one of my friends is a doctor, and like we read science as atheists. We tend to do that. And so I know that you can work with, like, she suffers from anxiety and sometimes depression, but I know that you can work with it. I know that it's not something you can just get over, but people learn how to live their lives alongside this thing that they have to. It's tougher for them, and I feel bad for her. She had a rough start to life until she came to live with us, but it's the fact that she doesn't want to do her homework has nothing to do with it. Like, it's, nobody wants to do their homework. I don't know.
Yeah, that's, I was gonna say, that's I mean, you would have a whole different set of worries if you had a 17-year-old who just wanted to come home and just do their homework all the time.
Yeah,
you'd be like, okay, what's wrong with this kid? But yeah,
I get that, struggling with anxiety and struggling with depression can make it more difficult to get motivated and to get moving, but it's possible to do it. And that's what we have argued about a lot, is just whether or not it's actually possible, because in her mind it's not, and it's just, there's no point in even trying, because she's not like physically capable of doing homework.
Yeah.
Of course she is.
Yeah. So I think that's a phenomenon. I mean, just aside from children, I'm seeing with a lot of adults as well, who go to therapy they're struggling with depression, they're struggling with anxiety, and a lot of us have, but they'll often I mean, this sounds really bad saying it, but like sometimes they will use that as a crutch for things that they weren't able to do. And the problem with that is, and this is actually something that therapists try to avoid. They try to still empower you, because the whole idea is learning how to cope. It's not giving yourself a label and using that as a crutch. So but I think that's something you just kind of learn as you grow older, especially if you have the right kind of parenting. and the right kind of influences around you. Do you ever worry that, I worry about this with my kids sometimes, because people say, she's such a good kid. She listens, she'll follow directions. And then that sometimes scares me. And I think, well, I want her to rebel against me sometimes. I want her to argue with me and win, I don't want her to lose every argument, even sometimes, if it's not necessarily rational. I want her to be able to say, no, I want to do this, and then go ahead and do it, and defeat me from time to time, and rebel, because you don't want a total conformist all the time. Do you ever find yourself concerned about it? Are you conscious about it when you're
I have been concerned about that before, but both my kids are pretty okay with arguing with me. So I'm not super worried about that. My son is very headstrong, just like I am. So we butt heads a bit. Yeah. About little things, but I'm happy about that. And that's actually one of the things that we were really happy about, was when my stepdaughter would argue with us about these things, because she was coming from a place of extreme, like, we're talking absolutely crippling anxiety when we first had her here, right, where she wouldn't get out of bed. Like, she would not get out of bed. And when we got her to the point where she's arguing with us, that was like a win. Like, we were excited. We're like, oh my gosh, she's like standing up to us.
That's such a good, that's such a good point. Yeah. Right. A lot of times, it is healthy. I mean, if someone is just kind of following everything you're saying and just being a conformist, you start worrying about them. You're like, well, what is this? Why aren't they asserting themselves more? And when they do, it's usually a sign of good, probably, good mental health in that context, at least.
Yeah. It means that they trust themselves. They don't need to follow, and they're less susceptible to fall for other people's stuff, I think. But I definitely think that's important when they fight you. And see, I set an example for them, because I do this, and so many times I've said, people I know, like, in this little town, nobody's very religious and everybody's very polite, but I know that prior to me kind of coming out as godless mom, everybody was a little bit different with me, and now I get the avoidance. And so I know that some people don't like me because of my blog. I know that people don't agree with what I do. I've seen, like, some of my friends from back in the day unfriend me on Facebook without saying anything. And I know why. I know why they're doing that. And I've talked to, because it'll be people in town, and I know that they have a problem with me. And I've had those conversations with Joey, because it's obvious in public, right? Like, they will look me in the eye and not say hi, right? When they used to be like, oh hi, wow, Courtney. Yeah, like, just stuff like that. And so it's not a lot of people, but it's just, a little handful of people. I know they have a problem with me. And so I've had that conversation with Joey, that I don't care. If they want to be like that, if they want to be petty because I have a differing opinion than religious people, and I feel like talking about it, then I don't really care. I don't need those people. And I've said that to him a million times. I've said it to him, that if people don't accept you the way that you are, providing you're not hurting anybody, if people don't accept you, then they shouldn't be in your life. So I go against the grain a lot, is what I'm trying to say. And they see it. And I think that one of the strongest ways to impart ideas to kids is by setting an example. And my dad's the same way. He's always been this rebellious guy who's always at protests and stuff like that. And very involved in politics. And I just took my kids to Jagmeet Singh's rally before the election. Yeah. That was super fun. They were like, like amazed by the spectacle and everything. So I think like it got them connected a little bit to politics and stuff like that. So I think setting an example.
For those who don't know, Jagmeet Singh is the leader of the New Democratic Party in Canada. It's one of the three major political parties here.
Yeah.
So that's great. You kind of, I guess, touched on it, and this was sort of my last-ish question for you, is just that with people from the Muslim community, just generally who are raising the kids, they're often, what you're saying about the people who now know about your blog and they don't say hi to you and they look you in the eye and they just kind of walk by. So the people who leave religion, especially in the Muslim community, it's looked at even worse. You're exposed to it working with AAI. So I guess there's a question for you both as a co-exec director for AAI, and as a parent going through and as godless mom, your own experience that you're talking about, the ostracization. When these people, when they come out as ex-Muslim, for instance, then they are often ostracized by their own families and their friends and their communities and all that. And then on top of that, they're raising kids, so often the kids also get ostracized and they get isolated. This might be putting a lot of pressure on you to answer this, but what advice would you have, having somewhat of a similar experience here, for people who do take those steps? Like, one thing that I was going to say that I've noticed is that you do tend to, even though you lose a lot of people, you do tend to gain another community, especially nowadays. So I don't know if you found any of that as well, or if you have any parallels or advice to give for those people.
Yeah, I've actually written about this a lot, because this is a question I get asked a lot too, is, how do you deal with overbearing family who are religious and stuff like that? And the number one thing that I always tell everybody is be very, very clear about boundaries. Just make it clear and tell them what the consequences will be if they cross those boundaries, and then follow through with those boundaries. And it's that simple. And then you've got to remember, it's not simple, it's family. And if you have to, if you have to stop being around family, of course, that's not an easy thing to do, but you have to remember that there's no reason to keep, especially as atheists now, if we don't believe in eternity, we only have this one life. Keeping toxic people in your life is just not worth it. And if you give them a chance by setting the boundary and saying, look, this is what I'm comfortable with, this is what I'm not comfortable with. If you cross this line, you can't be around my kids anymore, or something like that, right? And if they cross it, you've got to follow through, because you got to put your kids first, you got to put yourself first. You can't control other people. You just can't. And you have to look out for yourself. You have to live this life, because you don't get another one. And that's I think personally, that's the only answer to that. I don't think you should argue. I don't think you should try to convince them or anything like that. I think if they are crossing boundaries that make you uncomfortable and you've made it clear, then you gotta ditch them. You gotta get rid of them, and you gotta find yourself another family. It's cheesy, but family is not always blood.
Yeah.
You can lots of like-minded people out there who are going to support you. And of course it's very easy for me to say this because of the way I grew up. So but this is how it looks like from the outside. To me, this is what I think. Well,
it's an important perspective. I mean, we've heard, and that's why I'm asking you about this, because we have heard a lot of stories about this from the inside, from people who are in that situation. But I think it's so important to have a view from somebody on the outside who's looking in, and especially someone who has been raised in a different way, because that can be an aspirational example, right, for people who are in much tougher situations. So there, you always have the, you're privileged, grew up secular, you're white, you're this, you're that. But I think that I don't know. I think that a lot of those insights are completely invaluable, and there's way too much of that privileged stuff going on. I mean, there's too much of an oppression Olympics thing in the discourse nowadays. Yeah. So, but thank you for joining us. I mean, this was excellent. I really enjoyed this. And
me too.
And you said you had a book, right?
Yeah, actually, my book is about it's about, basically each chapter is a myth that people like to put out there about atheists, and then I use a story from my life growing up secular as a way to debunk that myth. And because I personally think one of the greatest things that religious leaders do is storytelling. They're so great at standing up in front of a crowd and invoking emotion and just getting you feeling something, right? And
yes, we have talked about that so much here. We've talked about it all the time. And I remember in the beginning, Armin and I used to argue about this because we used to talk about facts and stories. And I told him, and we used to talk about, Yuval Noah Harari, how he talked about how fictions of, great. I don't think that it's just fictions or nonfiction. I think it's a matter of storytelling versus not. You can have a PDF of bullet points and they can all be factual and everything. And they might appeal to people like you or me. Mm-hmm. But most people need something they can relate to, something they can feel. And you don't, and that doesn't always have to be bullshit. Like with religion, it has been bullshit. Yeah. But you can do that. Like you mentioned Cosmos, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Carl Sagan, they were master storytellers with, real ideas and truth. Yeah. Richard Dawkins is another great example of a fantastic writer who has just created these, wonderful stories that just leave you wide-eyed and just inspired. And he's done that with truth. But you're absolutely, I'm speaking about this a lot because it's something I feel very strongly about, but I really think you're right. Or the one thing that's missing in this whole rational sort of left-brained, super logical type thing is a good story. I think that storytelling is the thing that we really need to work on. That probably includes fiction and includes, like the Da Vinci Code. What a great way to expose people to it. Imagine if that alternative history of Christianity, that alternative idea was presented in a textbook or in a nonfiction format. It would sell like 7,000 or 8,000 copies. Yeah. But when you put a story to it, add a little fiction to it, suddenly, everybody knows about it now. It's just, I think that makes a big difference. Anyway, my rant's over, but you just touched on it right at the end. So I had to get that out there.
That's what it's about. It's just stories from my life, because I love writing about, I've had a weird, strange, crazy life, and I've done a lot of very just out there things, and like mostly because my parents took us around the world a few times, and so I just wanted to, like, one of the things that people say is that atheists, they can't experience awe, and like I can't even begin to explain how much awe I've experienced in my life traveling to places like Koh Phi Phi, this beautiful island in Thailand, or Tahiti or Fiji. Like how do you not experience awe in a place like that? And so that's basically what it's about, is just using storytelling, using emotional storytelling to connect with the reader and try to get them to see that an atheist isn't really all that scary, or actually kind of okay sometimes.
Yeah, I think that, going by example, if, people see, okay, you don't have horns, you're not eating babies, you're actually a good person. Yeah. And then, and that happens a lot. With my family, a lot of people, I grew up a lot of times thinking that if I started talking about, my own mom used to say, she used to tell me, like, if you start saying these things to your uncles and aunts and everything, everybody's going to stop talking to you. But the opposite happened. When I started talking about it, it became, because what would happen is they'd read this stuff, they'd call me up and say, I don't like what you wrote on Facebook. then have a conversation with them. They'd come over for dinner, whatever. We'd meet up, and they'd see, oh wow, he's the same guy who wrote the stuff on Facebook, but he's the same guy. He's still, he's nice, he's good. He's playing with my kids. He's doing, all the stuff, and it had the effect of actually normalizing the idea that you can be an atheist in a Muslim family and still be good. And I think it's a very important thing. What is the name of your book, and where can people get it?
The name is still up in the air, and it's not done yet.
So you're still writing, yeah.
And
I totally want to read it now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm still sending it out to some literary agents and hoping to hear back, and maybe some publishers and stuff. But if I don't get a bite, I'll just publish it myself and put it out there.
Well, I'm going to do Armin a favor, because if he's probably going to be listening to this, and he'll be squirming. He's like, Ali, did you mention this or not? And Armin is a big proponent of self-publishing. Atheist Republic it has its own independent publishing platform. They've published a lot of things, and he's sold, I don't know how many, like tens of thousands of copies of his own book as well. So he is going to really, really encourage you to do it. If you want to go that independent publishing route, like, definitely talk to him, especially for a book like this. I think I'm really looking forward to hearing it. I mean, you got me going on a whole rant when I thought our time was up. So I'm looking forward to it. But anyway, thank you for this. And I told you I'm gonna have you back on, because I know Armin wants to talk about Atheist Alliance International and what your vision is for the coming year. I got the newsletter.
Bridge it on at the same time.
Yeah. I think we'll do that. We'll reach out, and you had some other guest suggestions too, and I'm gonna reach out to them as well. So I'm hoping to do that, and hoping to see a lot more of you, the coming year. So
cool. Well, thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, and last thing, where can people find you? Can you just say because we're going to put it in the description, but can you just say it for the people listening on audio? What's your Instagram handle, Twitter?
Instagram and Twitter are the same. It's at godless_mom, MOM. And Facebook is facebook.com/godlessmom, all one word there.
Okay, perfect. All right, everybody. You heard it all here. You know where to find Courtney. Check it out. Check out Atheist Alliance International, and look out for her book that's coming soon. Courtney, thank you so much.
Thank you
for coming on here. Appreciate it. Okay.
The secular jihadists have been made possible thanks to the Illuminati and the covert support of Israel and the CIA. That's what we have been told, but we haven't received our checks yet. If you like what we do, please support us. Share the podcast with your friends. Write and tweet us with topic and guest suggestions. Or head over to secularjihadists.com and give $1 or more for exclusive access to live video. Have your questions read and answered on the air, and more. Till next time, may the flying spaghetti monster be with you.